This chapter was actually quite laid back in comparison to the last dozen or so chapters that we had read so far, because there was a lot of action that happened from, I think it was chapter 240 or so, where we had the whole confrontation between Kuroki and the Connector and their groups, which was a pretty hype moment, to of course the fight between Nico and Setsuna and the whole Gilbert Okoye situation. And so one would expect that after such huge events like that eventually we would cool off, and so here we are. And this chapter kind of does confirm that the fight between Shen Wulong and whoever the Kengan Association is gonna pick is going to happen fairly soon, actually before the the Real Champions tournament. So Shen Wulong, if you expect him to win, which I kinda do, then Shen Wulong might be part of the Real Championship tournament, which is something I thought about before when it came to the Real Championship tournament, but this is actually a very interesting detail because we could have characters like, of course, Yan, Nico, Lohan in that tournament. But let's take a few steps back because we're going way too far ahead of the story. We actually have to talk about what happened in the chapter itself, and that is of course the Kengan Association trying to figure out Shen's weakness, or what their plan of action is to guarantee that they win. Because the Kengan Association, for the most part, doesn't seem like they want to lose, but they also know that they're under surveillance. That's why they pick a pretty casual spot to meet up in, because they know that the worm probably has spies that could watch them at any point, where either it's a clone or someone who's basically swapping identities with one of the other members, which has kind of happened before. And it seems as though they're trying to figure out, okay, do they even have someone who's strong enough to defeat Shen Wulong? And Rito is out here, or let me call him Lito with an L, because he thinks he can actually do something. Like, oh my. And the look on Nogi's face, dog, when he says absolutely not, is the same face. Honestly, it was kind of the face I was making when Lito was like, oh, I'm going to take on the Connector. I was like, are you kidding me? This guy, Lito? I mean, I know there are a lot of Lito agenda pushers, but come on. At this point, you gotta know that you're banking in the wrong place, man. Like, come on. Kuroki exists. There are better options out there. But of course, Nogi does talk to Lito and says that the reason you probably can is because of course he's too powerful, because Nogi has seen some of the top tier fighters in the Kengan Association fight. Even though he's not necessarily a fighter himself, he can probably judge strength at least better than your average Joe. And even he says, like, look, listen, the moment you meet him, you'll realize that you can't even have a fair fight with this man. And that's when they transition into, okay, how else could we win? You know, other means, quote unquote. They're talking about possibly cheating or pulling an underhanded move to beat Shen Wulong. And honestly, it's pretty interesting, and actually it's expected that they're kind of considering this. Considering, like, if they do want to win and they recognize that, yeah, Shen Wulong's probably going to beat anyone they pick, they would probably have to consider how they could influence outside factors in order to at least increase the chances of Shen Wulong losing. And they talk about poison, they're talking about sniping him, but of course those things wouldn't work because we would assume there would be worm members there. So Yan, Gilbert, all these dudes would be present. And so they probably wouldn't let something as underhanded as that fly, which brings us to, of course, one of the probably better ideas that the Kengan Association has, and that is using Queen Bee. Reno's ability is actually something that makes sense to use on Shen Wulong, at least for the most part. But of course, Reno does put a lot of skepticism behind this idea because it really only works with people that have a sexual preference towards women. And also, the more they understand, the better, of course, the brainwashing could work. But another factor seems to be that some people can kinda resist. And so Reno's actually more or less worried that even if she were to try to order Shen Wulong, he might be able to resist, mainly because he's worried about, of course, him actually even having a sex drive at all, since he seems so abnormal as a human being. I also don't think it would work, mainly because of what I think is going on with Shen Wulong currently. And I will explain this later on, but yeah, I don't think it would work. Even if you could say Shen Wulong did have like a sexual, drive, I don't think it will work. And so with that, it seems like the Kengan Association is out of ideas. And so we have to ask the person that basically was the closest with the connector for a bit. And that is Joe. And Joe, he wants no part of it. We do know that Shen Wulong did say that Joji did have a chance in beating him, mainly because he was emotionally conflicted when it actually came to fighting Joe. So they ask, of course, Joji Norishima to actually fight Shen Wulong at first. And Joji, he's like, nah fam, I'm not gonna do it because they want Shen Wulong dead. Koga and the Kengan Association. Which, by the way, we haven't seen Koga in such a long time. I'm glad to see that he's actually back for a change. But carrying on with the actual chapter, eventually they even just ask him for any weaknesses Shen Wulong might actually have. And Joji surprisingly says he knows a guy. And this is actually the funniest part of the entire chapter. Is that, hey, I know a guy who knows how to beat the connector. And that's very interesting because at first it seems like a joke, and it is a joke. But I think there's something true about what's actually going on there, but I'll cover it in my Understanding the Connector video. But he says he knows someone who knows how to beat the connector. And Koga and the gang, of course, are pretty thrilled about this. Okay, take us, let's go meet him. And let him tell us how to beat the connector. And it turns out the only person who knows the weakness and knows how to defeat the connector is the connector himself. And we see, of course, Shen Wulong come in there. Joji had called him up. He even says he's sorry to bother him. And yeah, now it's going to be interesting to see where this goes because there's a milestone chapter soon, which is chapter 250. I'm expecting the battle between Shen Wulong and whoever they're going to pick, which is probably going to be Kuroki, is going to happen around chapter 250, or there's going to be a big revelation in chapter 250. One of the two, because milestone chapters do actually matter in Kengan Omega. But yeah, that's it. That is the chapter. It ends on quite a funny note, and I'm quite interested into seeing how Shen Wulong will pitch in, because he's more than likely going to answer the question as honestly as he possibly can, whether or not he actually thinks he's invincible or whether or not he does actually have weaknesses. So yeah, that's going to be the chapter itself. If you like the review, don't forget to like and sub, and until next time, take it easy.